So I'm going to attempt to do what the fourth relay runner does when you're very behind and you have to catch up. So we're 1.5 hours behind. So my apologies. Punctuality is politeness of kings, which make all of us, well, beggars. So in the interest of time, you know everybody, very distinguished panelists. We will try to keep this brief but effective, and I'm hoping at the end of this you find something useful and a potential pathway to engage. So my first question to everyone, and we'll start from Mr. Aromar, since you already know what everyone does, is your journey to where you are as founder of IIHS is very interesting. Can you tell us how you got here and what's the exciting parts of urban transformation that led you here, your journey in a nutshell? And unfortunately, I'm going to ask you to keep it 3 minutes.
Oh, I'll keep it very short. I think I worked almost 40 years just now dealing with first questions of rural India and urban India. In some senses, I think this panel is kind of, or at least this room, is misnamed. It's not only about social transformation, it's fundamentally about economic transformation. And the challenge that we have in this country is to keep the balance between the rural and the urban. Unlike China, we have 5.5 lakh villages and we have only 10,000 urban centers. And in India, 100 places produce 40% of our GDP. So for us, the challenge is actually to keep the balance. In fact, we heard in the panel before, the challenge is really centrally about people. So that's what we worked on for a range of period, and people and institutions. And if you're not able to add value through institutions and people, you don't really have any hope of taking things forward. And in that, I would imagine one of the most interesting things is to try to find people and institutions that can actually make a change at scale. So what we've been doing over the last many years is to try and train and educate people who can actually make this change at scale, not only in one state, but in multiple states across the country. And it is possible, but it's pretty tough because, we have a lot of barriers in this country. And overcoming those barriers is not particularly easy. And the fundamental barrier, I think, is most of the challenges that we see at the moment are systems challenges. So you can solve a problem in one particular area, but you have to bring the system together to sort of work. And that's what I think the big challenge of our cities are. None of our cities actually work. These 100 places that produce 40% of our GDP, they don't function on a day-to-day basis for most people in the city. Even elites, they don't work for, whether it's air pollution or whatever it is. So fixing the systems challenges are really tough. And that's where I think this sort of partnership between government and, of course, people from the IITs are important, because some of us are trained in dealing with systems. You can't solve things by optimizing one part of it. And most of those challenges are not technical. The technical thing is easy. We do factor 5 stuff all the time. The problems are institutional, they're social, and the economic. And that is an area in which we're not very well trained
to. Jaya, you've been at WRI for a long time, and we just heard how everyone thinks the government is the scaler. Can you just tell us a little bit about your work and how you got here?
Sure. So I have come into the space of cities, not by accident. I worked for a long time in the US, in the city of Charlotte. I was with their planning department. I worked for the government to create sort of transformation in a city which was already way ahead of the curve in terms of how they were dealing with sort of their, urbanization and everything. And that was strangely, it stopped being gratifying after a point of time. And when I looked at, when I was looking at coming back to India and looking at, what is the scale of the problem here, and I'll just tell you about Bangalore. This is where we are sitting. This is where I work. So when you consider the scale of the problem, it was gargantuan, right? So right now, Bangalore is building at like 800 square feet per minute. A lot of that buildings is happening in the outskirts and the peripheries of the city, where a lot of the ecologically sensitive infrastructure rests, which means that 85% of blue-green infrastructure is actually built upon, and which is why you have 10 centimeters of rain over a span of a day and the city is flooded in many parts, right? Those people living in these peripheral areas are therefore having to commute to their work, to wherever they need to be. The current sort of vehicle registration in the city is about 20,000 per day, right? And then these people are sitting on the streets, we people actually are sitting on the streets, losing 8 productive days in a year, just trying to get to work and come back, not taking into account, the health impacts of doing that day in and day out. On the efficiency side, when we look at, and when I'd actually moved back, there was a huge waste crisis going on in Bangalore, and realized that only 20% of the waste is actually processed, and everything else goes to either water bodies or places where it shouldn't be, and then to the landfills. And there was a whole sort of systems efficiency problem around that, which strangely didn't look like it was going to be solved. And so at WRI, where I've been, and then of course the climate catastrophe that we are in right now, and just last year's flood was what cost Orca, I think, 220 crores in losses, and that was just not even accounting for the infrastructure damage, etc. Right? That was just productivity. So when we are looking at all of this, then the work that naturally attracted me at WRI was the work with cities. Indian cities, like Arun said, there's the huge mega cities, big cities like Bangalore, like Mumbai, Delhi, and then India has a long tail of urbanization where there is absolutely no capacity to deal with any of these problems. And at WRI, therefore, the work that we are doing is looking at low carbon, inclusive and resilient development. And the way that we are going about tackling it is, on the one hand, looking at national and subnational level policy and how to bring more coherence around that. To tackle with sort of the stage of urbanization that we're in. And on the other hand, looking at cities and helping them develop what we call first practice solutions, solutions which haven't been tried elsewhere, to see how they can kind of evolve in a city and how we can kind of get cities to be sort of more sustainable and on a more resilient path.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Professor Verma, you have a very interesting story of how you got here, and Chatham House rules, so go for it.
Thanks. I am a professor of transportation systems engineering at Indian Institute of Science. Been almost 15 years that I have been here. Originally by education, I am a civil engineer. It's long time since I have, really looked at the aspects of transportation engineering from a civil engineering lens. It's been a journey that we have learned a lot on how we have to reinvent and rethink or have a different way of looking at things. As Aromar really pointed out, you need a systems approach. You can't solve problems in isolation. This is what we have learned. It's not a bottom up, where you look at hotspots of traffic congestion and just think about certain engineering based measures to relieve those hotspots. It's a very naive and narrow way of looking at things. So what we have learned over time in our research lab and have developed our strength is to look at problem solving in transportation and mobility with a clear systems approach and with a clear focus on development goals. And when I say systems approach, essentially understanding how transport connects and have linkages or causality to say externalities connected to transport, be it carbon emissions, be it tailpipe emissions coming from motorized vehicles, or impact on health of people due to exposure to pollutants, or impact on quality of life and overall livability of cities. These are all important aspects, even aspects of accessibility, equity, to different sections of people who wants mobility needs, who wants travel needs. So how do you solve the core issues of transportation, whether it is traffic congestion, travel time delays, unreliability of transport system, through the lens of development goals, but with a strong systems approach to look at its connection to several other systems, including urban planning and land use and how it shapes us. That's how we have set up our agenda. What we should really keep in mind is, when you look at transportation system, there is a time lag that India has with respect to what US or say European countries have seen. The situation in terms of the exponential growth of vehicle ownership, especially car ownership that we are seeing today, has been experienced in say America in early 60s or in Europe in early 70s. So there is a huge time gap and it is also closely related to the economic status and the economic development of our country versus these countries. So this contextual difference has a lot to do with what we are seeing today, and that actually gives us both a leapfrogging opportunity as well as challenges to do that. I am not going to elaborate now, maybe later, but this is how we are trying to see how we can shape up policies in this country, in urban areas, to see that our cities see a more sustainable future and they are more livable.
Thank you. Raghu, over to you. So briefly, can you tell us how you got into working in the urban transformation space and what you do specifically in it?
Well, my distinguished panelists over here had a very straight path. Mine wasn't so straight. I started working in the power sector and thus got an overarching view of the power sector. And somewhere along the line shifted into the water sector, setting up desalination plants and the technology for drinking water. And that was for a family-run company which I left because of various reasons. And since I didn't want to compete, IT beckoned to me, and that's how I came into IT. And I wrote out the report for IT in the power sector with Nandan and transportation with Mohandas Pai when I was with Infosys. And so my learning has been the following. When we talk about urban transformation, we cannot take away the government from the picture. We can talk about all sorts of thinking, but it's essentially the government that really is in the picture. Since the chairman mentioned Chatham House rules, just to give you an incident, when this is 1 minute, we were in a state where there was a huge tender of over 2,000 crores to be decided. Technical evaluation had been done. I was the person doing it from Infosys. But however, the minister was a person who was willing to listen, was under pressure to accept somebody else, like it happens in most of the government. And the deal in that case was that if this project is not implemented successfully, the grant which is given by the center is going to be converted into a loan which then gets added to the power tariff. And to make this more real, this was in Madhya Pradesh and the minister was from Gwalior. So I flew into Bhopal and I was talking to the minister and the chairman of the IISc board. And I had to tell him in Hindi, sir, आपने last time जीते थे ग्वालियर से 30,000 वोट से, पर बिजली का दाम बढ़ेगा, ये आदमी नहीं इम्प्लीमेंट कर पाया तो बिजली का दाम बढ़ेगा तो 30,000 आदमी आप जीतेंगे या नहीं, आप मैं तो बता नहीं सकता. So immediately his face changed and he told the chairman, जैसे प्रोफेशनल्स कर रहे हैं करने दीजिए. So you got to understand that in urban transformation, the politician has an agenda, a good agenda, because he has to face the voter. The bureaucrat has an agenda that he has to execute, and the common man has an agenda that he has to live. Now, from a technology's perspective, we need three things to come together: power, energy, water, and roads. And what has happened, unfortunately, is that our cities, our city governance has become very emancipated. In most of the Western world, you have a city council which possibly everything reports into. But here, for various reasons, we know that electricity reports to somebody else, transport reports to somebody else, water reports to somebody else. So how do we bring this all together? Now, one of the things that I do is to see how technology can impact some of the changes. For example, when we did the Accelerated Power Reforms Development Program, that AT&C losses, which was only in the distribution sector, which is what power we consume at home, was 33%. That is, throughout the country on a national average, we lose 33% even after it's generated, even before it's built. Not a sustainable model. Of course, now we brought it down to 22%, but even that is not a sustainable model. We lose 1 lakh crore rupees just by power distribution companies. None of the 80 or 100 or 80 or 90 power distribution companies in India are profitable at all. So therefore, I think the first thing is, I think we may have a second round of questions and I'll answer that at that point in time. What are the new technologies which we can incubate to sort of help this journey for urban transformation? Similarly, I met a gentleman who's possibly going to be the speaker in the afternoon. He had a very interesting technology on condensation, and he said he's making water through condensation. I said, wow, because I have done desalination and I know the problems associated with desalination. So can we see what are the new technologies that can enable urban transformation? And lastly, how do we work with the government to actually put this all in place? Many of them are IITians, many of them are willing to listen, but yes, they have their own agendas which we should appreciate and work with them.
Thank you. My second round of questions, Jaya, let's start with you. At a macro level, a ton of conversations that we have are around the fact that there are great ideas, there is intent, there is capital, but there is this lacuna with the government and the stakeholders involved to getting anything done. Of course, like he said, there's competing priorities and things like that. So what does an institution like WRI do to take ideas like this, good frameworks that work, solutions that could possibly transform a city? How do you take that to action in the government context through your policy work?
Yes, and so that's a very important thing, Sanjana. I mean, like we said, we have to work with the government, and we have to figure out how to do it in a best way so that it kind of matches their sort of aspirations, their goals, as well as what the citizens are trying to get to. And at WRI, the way that we've been approaching this is basically starting with data and evidence, because at the end of the day, you can't manage what you can't measure. So when you're looking at urbanization, when you're looking at the different scales of problems, first thing I think we are trying to bring to bear is data and evidence. For example, Aromar talked about the economic sort of scale of what cities bring to the table. We also in India, only 3% of this land area of India is urban, right? And so it's an extremely land constrained area that is bringing that kind of a huge economic sort of effort, and how do kind of governments respond to that? So the first step is really data and evidence. The second way is to kind of use that to inform plans. We have been working on, for example, the climate action plan of Mumbai, and the Bangalore one got recently released. So we're looking for that evidence to inform plans. And at the same time, looking at bringing policy coherence, because policy may exist, and there's actually very good policy in this country when you talk about, sectors like water and energy and some of those. But the problem is with kind of translating that on the ground and how that gets done. So how do you bring policy coherence where, your policy in transport is not conflicting with an urban policy, etc. The next thing basically is looking at governance, because unless you solve for governance, and it's a very tricky, wicked problem to solve for, it's not easy because we have inherited, sort of British legacy in terms of our governance systems. That hasn't changed in the ways our cities are responding on the ground. And so how do you kind of bring governance mechanisms, institutionalized way of doing business, which are responding to current issues? And finally, I think the most important thing really is platforms for engagement. So looking at, platforms for innovation, for data sharing, for getting sort of public sector into the private sector into the conversation for public sector is another thing that we are looking at and focusing on a lot, and especially looking at some of these solution providers. I think someone asked the question about how can MSMEs contribute to this some more. How can they? And how can they do it in a way where they are not causing unintended negative consequences for people? So those are some of the things that we are looking at very closely in this space.
Thank you. So the next question is actually from a conversation with an audience member, and it's to you, Professor Verma. It was that, you live in South Bangalore. How long did it take you to get here? Did you get your passport stamped on the way? And I think we've spent the year of course, been the butt of so many jokes. The flooding, Trevor Noah, all of that. Since you work in the trifecta of transportation, traffic congestion, and innovation, is there hope?
Thanks. It's a tricky question, but yes, there are answers, there are solutions. As you rightly said, Ravi, that technical solutions are all there. If somebody asks me, what have you got from your 15 years of research that you can give it for the city, from a transportation interventions perspective, we can think about different layers, policy at the top, planning, that is infrastructure and, everything. operation and management behavior. I would say in 15 years we have researched on everything. Any aspect that you can think about on any level, I can take out and give solutions. So that's not an issue. But as been highlighted by most of the speakers, it's all governance which is failing us. And not just governance, this is a gathering of technocrats. I would say technocracy is also failing equally to get the right solutions for the city, and I'll try to explain this, especially when you look at these transport infrastructure planning in urban areas. The whole, it's also because I have worked in government for a few years before I came to academics in MMRDA. So I have seen the system from inside also. It's not something that I just look at it from outside. So the whole decision process of what infrastructure to place, where to place, what mode to focus on, whether you should have a flyover or a tunnel road in Bangalore or in Mumbai, this whole sets of 50, 60 flyovers that was started by MSRDC long back. These are all decisions that are happening top down. Or we are discussing about monorail, in Mumbai. These are all decisions happening top down. In fact, now transport and mobility is a big civic issue. It's a big, issue of public debate, and it has become part of the election manifestos of political parties. So the project gets decided right in the election manifesto itself, that we will build flyover if you vote for us, and so on and so forth. Now what is happening is, even if this is a top-down, eventually it comes to the technocrats working in different urban local bodies in different organizations. Now they are told to prepare reports and justify this. This is where the role of technocrats is, and this is where I feel technocrats in the government system and even consultants who are working from there are actually failing in their responsibility. You may have wonderful and crazy idea coming out from top, but you got to evaluate it on pure technical grounds, put that back in the file and send it back. Taking decision is not your responsibility, so why you worry about? But at least do your technical evaluation rightly and send it back. Let the politician or the bureaucrat decide what they want to do. But what is in actual happening is that you get a message from top, and what the technocracy essentially is doing is prepare nice report that justifies those ideas and projects and help the bureaucrats and politicians have their agenda being done. So this whole ecosystem, unless it improves, it's very difficult, even if I have all the ideas to push it. So a lot of time our energy is lost in trying to stop government from doing something which is very wrong. We have been succeeded in several attempts in stopping some nasty projects, including presently about this tunnel roads that present government is talking about. But it's so difficult.
So thanks for that. Opportunity cost. I don't think anyone's quantified that when you think about city transformation. Something to think about, Jaya. Aromar, in many ways, you are the external-facing voice for lots of things, transformation from an Indian context. And one of the questions that I had, and when I was talking to you about Access Israel, that they had to us is that India is not even thinking about first principles of making cities livable, accessible, and there is absolutely no planning around what does Bangalore or any city look like 5 years from now. You're building institutions and you're training professionals in that space, you advise governments. What's your approach, and is there hope, similar to his question?
I guess, very quickly, I'll give you a concrete Thanks, Jaya. I'll give you a concrete example of what it is to make system change. So let's say, if you look at an urban area or an urban system, it's a system of systems. We've heard about them. There's a land system, there's an economic system, there's transportation that connects the two, and then there are all the services. There's water, there's energy, there's telecom, etc. Fine. To transform an urban landscape, you have to transform all the systems simultaneously. We don't have the economics for that, we don't have the technology, and we certainly don't have the governance. I'll give you an example from one system. It's a very obvious system. It's the water and sanitation system. Fine. It's very important because, diarrheal disease is the number 3 or number 4 challenge as far as health in this country is concerned, and it infects everybody. We've spent 6 years, actually almost 7 years just now, trying to transform that system in just one state. That is, how do you deal with water and sanitation in the state of Tamil Nadu? It's taken us 6 years to deal with it. And the challenge is very interesting. It starts with a technical challenge in the 1850s. In London, they had a huge problem like we have in many of our cities. So what do? They set up a privy in Queen Victoria's, palace, and they washed all the water down into the Thames. They had, this is how we develop public health. And that system has worked pretty much for many cities across the world, including all the colonial cities, Bangalore and Chennai. Unfortunately, that system does not work anymore in India for 2 reasons. The first thing is, we don't have the water. Fine. And in Tamil Nadu especially, because of climate change, we will not have the water. The second thing is, that you cannot build fast enough to be able to provide these sewage systems across the country. We've tried for 70 years, we can't do it fast enough. It's very expensive, it's complicated, and we do both ends of it. We do the toilets, we have a huge program, the Prime Minister has run it in one day, and we've done very well, and we have sewage treatment plants, but we can't connect the two up. That's the story of the Ganga for the last 35 years that I've seen it. I've kind of led some of the programs in that space. So we have to initiate a technical innovation. So we said, look, these centralized systems don't work. They work for some places, they don't work for everywhere. So we had to go to on-site systems of carriage, which is septic tanks and pit latrines. 80% of Tamil Nadu has that. So how do you do that? You basically take the sludge that comes out of the septic tank, you have a tanker, you suck it out by vacuum, you take it, and then you have to treat it. Traditional systems don't work. So you have to develop a new system of treatment, which is called septic treatment. I'm going through this stuff because many of us are technical people here. But that's not the problem. You can set up this entire chain. We've done it just now. 600 places across Tamil Nadu, 15 million people. Fine. In 2 years' time, we'll touch 25 million people across the state. The issue is not the technical side. We've spent lots of public money and et cetera, to make that happen. We've built all these systems that are there. The issue is not that. The issue is fundamentally a question of governance. And since we're talking about a question of social impact, it is about caste and gender. Because who cleans these systems? In spite of the fact that you have all the technology in the world, we have GPSs tracking these tracks, etc. It is a certain set of people who do that. Unless you change their lives, unless you change the economics of that process, the system will not change. Okay? That's the core thing. The challenge is, and this is a sort of a joke in some senses, I've been hiring and training IITians for many, many years. In the way that we train in the IITs and the IIMs, it takes about 2 years for us to sort of help people unlearn what they haven't learned. Fine. So you have to enable people to integrate social, economic, and environmental systems together. And we don't train for that. And that's what we're doing. That's what IIHS is. IIHS is a mix of an IIM, an IIT, and maybe Shantiniketan in its old days, to enable people to understand the connection between these things. Because if you don't change all of those processes, at the bottom, like I said in the beginning, if you don't change the circumstances of people inside this thing, you will be here 50 years from now, and the system will not change. And it's very hard to make that happen. And this is just one state. We have to do it in 30 states, or whatever, 30 states and UTs. And this is a very, very basic system, but it means technical change, it means social change, it means changing the bureaucracy. At the moment, we're training 6,000 engineers across Tamil Nadu. Because you've got to carpet bomb the system, because unless the incentives to the engineers who are very used to doing large-scale systems, because it's easier for them to calculate, to build, etc., and also, because they have to make money to keep their lives going, large-scale systems are places where you make money. Decentralized systems don't work. And I'll close with just this one idea, and that is that the interesting thing between us and China is most of the critical technologies of the 21st century are going to be decentralized. IT has enabled that, number one. 2, we have to live without fossil fuels and fossil water, because that story is over. Which means that we have to manage processes locally across the landscape. Look at renewable energy. It's about picking up energy from across the landscape in 3 dimensions. We can think and work like that because we have a society that can do that. The Chinese have given that up. We have a huge opportunity for social, economic, and technical innovation about decentralized network-based systems. And we don't have the theory for doing that. It can only be found here. The West can't do this. They have no interest in doing this at all. I'll stop there.
Thank you. I love your comment. But small problem to solve, getting 1/5 of humanity to think bottom-up solutions. I guess this is the right room for it. Raghu, a question to you, and I think it's a good segue from what you talked about. You work a little bit on the frontier of product innovation and ideas that can potentially work bottom-up and are decentralized. What are you working on that is potentially transformative in the urban context?
Yeah, so I think I take over from where he left off. I think I totally agree with him that energy, water, and living is going to be decentralized. For those of us who have background in electrical engineering, the Tesla versus Edison debate was comprehensively settled. But that led to large power plants, transmission systems, what have you. But you never thought about how each person could generate his own power till, of course, solar and EV came in. Could that be the solution? Now that is one of the technologies. The second technology is the entire aspect of generative AI. I think there was a comment about the next room having AI, but generative AI is going to be as good in urban transformation as it is going to be in whatever they're discussing in the next room. For example, fault location identification and service restoration. The Chinese and the Japanese have tried it. They're able to locate a fault, 45 milliseconds, they're able to restore a fault. Why can't we? After all, we have so much of generative AI that's floating around. So the third one, if you look at the miniaturization with power electronics of the entire energy system, can we get rid of these huge transformers that are there with GIS, etc.? You see every year shocking deaths of somebody stepping on a wire, so on and so forth. So if you look at the entire energy system, it's up for a change. If you look at the water system, the gentleman who's going to be talking, Mr. Ramakrishna, is going to be talking of condensation, is on to something big. If you talk about transportation, there are a lot of systems that are being tried upon. But you know the problem is with ourselves. A lot of us from IITs, we all know our technology. Every VC wants to invest in consumer technology. You have something which is a consumer portal, etc., you'll get funding for it. But if you have something which is for energy sector, you won't get it. They are rightfully so, for the simple reason that distribution companies take 6 months to actually pay them, so it becomes a negative spiral. And there are many like me who started off with a degree in basic infrastructure, civil engineering and mechanical engineering, but went on to software. And that's become the norm today. So I think even from an IIT perspective, I think it's time that we refocused on urban transformation. One is, of course, all the policy level, all the systems thinking, all that is fine. But after that, somebody has to go lay the wire. Somebody has to go and make the transformer work. Somebody has to make the job honorable enough. Somebody has to make it that the chief engineer or the assistant engineer of a distribution company is honorable enough, and he knows enough about generative AI to make Flisser work. I think that's where, if you look at it, what at least I am trying to do is to work to see some of these innovations. Can we bring it to something other than fintech and consumer tech, which is possibly the focus of a lot of the discussions there.
Thank you. So we are almost at our end, and I'm happy that we have nearly kept time and hopefully caught up for the next panel. But I have a last question to all our panelists. So a lot of you would be interested in figuring out a way to engage and understand how to partner with our panelists here. So my question is 2 parts. One is, tell us what you're working on that audiences can reach out to you for, that is in the transformation space. And the second is, what bets are you placing for the next 3 years in the areas that you're working on? So we'll start with Mr. Revi.
Very quickly, we can show you. We can show you buildings in the city where we're able to do factor 3, 4, and 5 on API indices. We have to scale it up 10,000 times. Just in this city, fine. And those of you who run IT parks and other things, this can be done. And we have instrumented things. I have something which is less than 10 minutes from here. And that's only in the building sector. We run the biggest single challenge in the world on net zero buildings. There are about 2,400 students who come in from 100 institutions, including the IITs. The challenge that we have is that we have students who want to do stuff, work on real projects with many people, let's say from institutions in the room. We can't find them jobs in the industry, because if they don't get those jobs, your industries are not going to change. And India is going to take us to 1.5, forget about it. It's going to take us to 2 degrees and above. So the solutions are there, but we have to try and scale them. We're putting bets on people and also systems change. We train the system integrators in the country. The only system integrators we have at the moment are the IIS folks, and they have no clue, because I trained most of them. We've trained 2,000 of them over the last 5 years. They have no clue how to run urban systems. So you have nobody who can run your cities at the moment. We talked about sort of urban managers. There's no chance that you can get to 7, 8, 10% growth. You cannot replicate China without that capacity. So we have a huge structural challenge in our education systems, in our institutional systems. You don't get the right people in the right place, you can do wonderful work on innovation, but the system won't shift.
Thank you. Jaya?
Yes, so I think two things, right? I mean, one is that India is hoping to be a 30 trillion economy by 2047. At the same time, 3/4 of our urban infrastructure is yet to be built, right? So that's about over $1 trillion sort of investment opportunity. But we need to get this investment right in a way that we don't lock ourselves into decisions today. So when you build, for example, a flyover, that's not just going to last for the next 5 years, 10 years, right? It's going to last for 40 years. So you have to think about what kind of decisions and what kind of systems you're locking yourselves into, and you need to find a way to transition towards better systems. So I think one of the things that we're working on towards is a national urbanization policy, because cities today have no way of knowing, how to build, how to grow, where to grow. The master plans and, all of the statutory documents we have, if you look across the country, they're failing us. And, there's an inherent sort of flaw with that. So one is looking at a national urbanization policy so that you can understand not only how to deal with the challenges of urbanization, but also, look at ways that you can benefit from the opportunities that it really brings. So that is one thing. And the other thing that we are really, working on and hopeful about, again, back to data and innovations, right? One is on the data side, looking at developing frameworks which can help decision support systems. So when we're talking about the undercapacities of urban local bodies, of bureaucrats, of different people who work and are decision makers, how do you give them robust decision support systems? And how do you make it sort of data-driven and evidence-based? So that is one thing that we really want to focus on. And of course, innovations, because a lot of the people maybe sitting here and in the halls today are innovators. They're looking at how to make change. Now, what's happening is innovation, unfortunately, for the most part, is happening in the private realm. It's happening for private good. So whether it's systems around how to make water delivery efficient, or how to make energy systems efficient, it's all happening in small sort of closed places. And the idea is, how do you leverage this for greater public good? How do you onboard innovation for public systems? And there are many barriers there, starting from procurement challenges to no institutions which can help with this problem. There are no, there's very low risk-taking capacity of urban local bodies and bureaucrats. And then how do you overcome these barriers? And then how do you get to sort of narratives which innovators can actually use to talk about sort of the impact that they're having in the social realm, not just from the numbers that they're producing as part of their products, but looking at how is this helping on the social side, the environmental side, the economic benefits of that. So, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, so one of the mission, statements of my research lab is to do advocacy of sustainable transport and mobility, purely based on unbiased, data-driven and research evidences. Anybody who has interest in supporting this and collaborating this is most welcome to talk to us. As I said, the clear focus that we have in terms of our research agenda is to look at transportation problems from the clear lens of development goals. And looking at that development goal and trying to see what we should look at our cities in future. I think the bottom line for urban transportation urban transformation is to make our cities more livable, or in other words, to improve quality of life of every individual. It's different than standard of living, and that should be the key, development agenda when we think about urban transformation. And now looking at the transportation lens within that, when people think about and talk about the future of transportation, there's a lot more discussion about smart mobility, connected and autonomous vehicles, use and more use of technology. While that's absolutely fine, it would have an important role. Technology will be an enabler, but that's not the total vision that we should have. I think when you have to think about, and this is also I say about Bangalore, many times when people ask me about how do you see the future of Bangalore and its mobility and transport system, I said to see that you should look back Bangalore of 60s and 70s, when a lot more people used to walk and cycle. I'm sure you would know, how our cities are and how many people used to walk and cycle. I think that is one aspect that we should bring it back in future if we really want to see our cities more livable, and improve quality of life of everybody. Technology can also be an enabler in how do you make people use more walk and cycling, how do you create more social spaces, how do you improve the social resiliency and social well-being of people. These are important aspects besides whatever technology that you think about for urban transformation. Thank you.
Thank you. Raghu.
Yeah, so I am working presently at the confluence of a couple of things. One is technology and innovation. So the school that I founded and I'm running, called Manipal Innovation, Leadership and Entrepreneurship School, we are trying to bring innovation apart from the jugaad as an innovative mindset. Signed up a couple of MOUs with some universities in UK and the US, seeing how to make that happen. We also have a 5-tier model to define entrepreneurship. What I'm looking at is there is the confluence of digital technologies which include telecom, generative AI, etc. There are the problems to be solved in urban transformation, which is energy, water supply, transportation, and one thing which we forgot is healthcare. So how can all these problems be got together? If you have an idea, I'm happy to work with you. There are 4 stages it goes through. One is a grant, where you get a grant. I'm happy to put you in Manipal lab, or we work with the Institute of Science lab. From there we get onto the seed stage, the Series A, and so on and so forth. But I'm more focused on what are the bigger problems that sort of then dive down into the smaller problem. Okay, so that is where we are at this point in time. I'm happy to talk to anybody who's on that particular thing, especially on some of the new problems. Especially with 5G and generative AI, she asked us a question, what do you see in the next 3 years? I think in next 3 years, 5G is not going to be like any other telecom. Because till 4G, everything, if you just make a call, the telcos made money. Today, if you don't have a use case, you don't make money. For example, we are working on a remote ICU in village areas to actually work on that. We're working on mental health and so on. We're working on robotics and mental health. The second is generative AI. I told you some use cases in the power sector. So those are the use cases that we would like to see happening a little bit more, which will transform actually at the grassroots level. The systems approach is very important, but at the same time, I represent the bottom-up approach, where we take youngsters, get their ideas, get them funding, get them capital, to make it come up to your systems level thinking. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. I understand we are out of time, so no chance of questions. You can find our speakers. I'm sorry, the relay was late, no thanks to us. But please find our speakers so that you can ask them anything that you want. Thanks for being a great audience. Thank you to our dear speakers.